The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland, sharp and bitter, carrying with it a scent Daniel Cole couldn't quite name. Something metallic, something that didn't belong to the wilderness. The sky above was a smear of gray, a colorless void that made the land feel endless. Cole's breath clouded before him as he trudged through the snow, each step sinking deep into the crusted white. He wasn't supposed to be here alone, but his gut had told him there wasn't time to wait. The call had come at 3:47 a.m., the voice distorted and ragged, barely human. Just one sentence before the line went dead. "You'll find her where the river stops singing." That phrase stuck in his head, looping in the rhythm of his boots crunching against the ice. He'd been with the Alaska State Troopers for 15 years, and calls like that always ended one of two ways. Either a prank from some drunk off his mind, or a nightmare waiting to crawl out of the dark. But something in that voice had felt real, desperate, maybe even afraid. Now, standing at the edge of the Koyuk River, Daniel could see that the caller had been right about one thing. The river had stopped singing. The water that once ran wild through this valley was frozen solid, silenced beneath a sheet of milky ice that stretched as far as he could see. The wind howled low and mournful through the trees, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He turned off the snowmobile and the world fell deathly quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until it hurts. He pulled his flashlight from his belt and swept the beam across the surface of the ice. The reflection glared back at him, pale and ghostly. Then, just at the edge of his light, he saw it. Something dark beneath the frozen surface. His heart skipped. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to test the ice too far from shore. The beam steadied and the shape took form. It wasn't driftwood. It wasn't debris. It was a body. For a long moment, Daniel just stared. The woman's face was trapped beneath the ice, her features distorted by the frozen ripples, her eyes wide open as if she'd been staring up when the river took her. Strands of hair floated around her face like threads of seaweed. Her lips were parted, frozen mid-scream. The ice had preserved her perfectly, too perfectly. She didn't look like she had drowned yesterday. She looked like she had been waiting here for years. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through him. He crouched closer, tracing the edges of the body with his flashlight. The clothes were wrong for this season. An old denim jacket, a red scarf faded almost white. Everything about her looked aged, like she'd been caught in time. He radioed in, but the signal was weak. Static filled the channel, broken only by fragments of his dispatcher's voice. "Copy that. Location?" He tried again, repeating his coordinates, but the transmission cut out completely. The mountains around him acted like stone walls, and his signal died in their shadow. He'd have to mark the site and head back to report it manually. But before he turned away, he caught something else, just beneath the woman's hand, frozen in the ice. Something glimmered faintly. He knelt down, brushed the snow away with his glove, and felt his stomach twist. It was a silver pendant, the chain coiled tight around her fingers. The charm was shaped like an eye. The wind shifted suddenly, colder, sharper, carrying with it a faint sound, something like footsteps on snow. Daniel froze, listening. He swung his flashlight toward the tree line. The beam caught nothing but drifting flakes. Still he could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes watching him from somewhere beyond the dark. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling clung to him like frost. He took one last look at the frozen woman. Her face, pale and still, seemed almost peaceful now, but there was something wrong about her eyes. They weren't just open, they looked hollow, empty. He turned away, his instincts screaming that he had already stayed too long. He started the snowmobile, its engine breaking the silence like a gunshot. As he drove back toward the small town of Greystone, the landscape stretched endlessly on both sides, barren and white. He couldn't stop replaying that single phrase from the call, where the river stopped singing. It didn't sound like a direction anymore. It sounded like a warning. Halfway back, the snow thickened and visibility dropped to almost nothing. He slowed the machine, squinting through the flurries. The world became a blur of white and gray, and then, just for a moment, he saw something standing on the ridge. A tall figure, wrapped in heavy furs, unmoving. Daniel blinked, and it was gone. When he finally reached the station, it was near dusk. The sky had turned bruised purple, and the cold was beginning to gnaw through his gear. Inside, the lights hummed weakly, the old building creaking under the weight of the wind. He shook off the snow and went straight to his office. The smell of stale coffee and paper filled the room. He sat down, pulled out his logbook, and began writing his report. Unidentified female body found frozen in Koyuk River, approximately 3 miles north of Greystone. Estimated age between 25 and 35. Signs of preservation unusual, pending recovery. He paused, tapping the pen against the page. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The ice this time of year wasn't thick enough to preserve a body that way. And that pendant, the eye. He'd seen it before. Somewhere in an old case file, maybe a photo, years ago. He couldn't quite remember, but the shape haunted him. He got up, went to the cabinet in the corner, and began searching through the old cold case files. Dust coated the folders, names long forgotten. He flipped through missing persons reports from the 1990s, each one a story that had vanished with the snow. Then he stopped. A photo stared back at him from a file dated 1996. The woman in the picture had a red scarf and the same pendant around her neck. Her name was Claire Morton. Daniel's stomach dropped. She'd gone missing 29 years ago. Yet the body he saw under the ice couldn't have been there that long. Not without decay, not without some trace of time touching her. He leaned back, heart pounding, a chill crawling through his veins. Outside, the wind rose again, howling against the windows like a living thing. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Daniel turned toward the sound. In that moment, through the thin glass, he thought he heard something faint, something impossible. A soft melody drifting through the storm. A woman's voice singing. He stood there, frozen, staring out into the white. There was no one there, no movement. Only the endless stretch of snow. The singing faded, replaced by the low groan of the wind. Daniel rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing down on him, but a single thought refused to leave his mind. If Claire Morton had been under that ice for nearly 3 decades, then whoever called him tonight knew far more than they should have. Someone had been watching that river for a very long time, someone who wanted her to be found, and somewhere out in the frozen dark that someone might still be waiting. Back at the station, the air smelled of bleach and steel, that familiar sterile tang that never quite masked the scent of death. The body from the river lay stretched out on the morgue table under harsh fluorescent light. Frost still clung to the hair, glimmering like crystal threads refusing to melt. Daniel Cole stood just inside the doorway, his breath still fogging faintly in the cold. He watched as the medical examiner, Dr. Leon Pratt, moved silently around the table, peeling away layers of frozen fabric. The red scarf came last. It tore in his hands, brittle as paper. Body temperatures consistent with deep freeze, Pratt muttered, voice muffled behind his mask. But look at the skin. There's no bloating, no sign of tissue breakdown. This woman hasn't decayed at all. Daniel stepped closer. The fluorescent light brought out every detail. The woman's eyes were clouded like old glass, her lips a pale violet, her face oddly serene. It looked like she'd just closed them seconds ago. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the stillness, it was what had been done to her. Pratt leaned in with a gloved hand and pointed to the ribcage. See that? Daniel's stomach twisted. Etched into the flesh, running from just below the sternum down to the navel, was a series of lines cut with surgical precision. At first glance it looked like scratches, but when the light shifted, the marks formed a pattern, a spiral ending in a single unblinking eye. I've seen some sick things, Pratt said quietly, but this feels different, purposeful. Daniel nodded but said nothing. His thoughts were already racing. He'd spent the last few hours digging through the cold case files, And Claire Morton's disappearance had stood out for a reason. There had been 3 others. All women. All vanished between 1994 and 1996. No suspects. No bodies, just traces. Hair, fabric, blood frozen into the earth. Each file ended the same way. Case suspended due to lack of evidence. Until now. He reached into his coat and pulled out a plastic bag. Inside was the pendant he'd found trapped in the ice, the silver eye. Found this wrapped around her hand, he said, placing it on the tray beside the body. Matches the one in Claire Morton's file photo. Pratt adjusted his glasses and peered down at it. Strange symbol. Almost looks like an old protection charm or a cult marking. Daniel didn't like the word cult. It brought back the wrong kind of memories. He'd seen what fanaticism did to people. How belief could twist mercy into ritual. He turned away from the body, rubbing the back of his neck. The image of that spiral burned into his vision. I'm calling Dr. Lorna Hayes, he said finally. She's a forensic anthropologist out of Anchorage. She's worked with symbolic pattern analysis before. Pratt gave a low whistle. That the one who cracked that totem case near Fairbanks? The one with the mummified miners? Daniel nodded. That's her. By morning, the storm had passed and a weak sun spilled through the frosted windows. Dr. Hayes arrived just after 9. She was tall, lean, wrapped in a heavy parka that looked too thin for this cold. Her hair, jet black, was tied back in a braid. Her face expressionless except for eyes that seemed to see too much. When she shook Daniel's hand, her grip was cold and dry, her smile polite but distant. I read your report, she said. The preservation you described, it's not natural, may I? She didn't wait for an answer before pulling on gloves and stepping beside the body. She leaned close, examining the spiral carved into the ribs, tracing it lightly with one gloved finger. It's not random. It's a sigil. A what? Daniel asked. A symbol meant to represent something. An invocation, a message, a mark of belonging. She looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. Whoever did this wanted her to be found, wanted someone to read this. Daniel frowned. You think it's part of a ritual? Not a ritual, Hayes murmured, studying the woman's face. A statement. They moved through the autopsy together, noting every oddity. The tongue had been removed cleanly, the edges cauterized. Her fingertips had been sanded down to erase prints. Even the dental records had been altered. Fillings removed, teeth polished smooth. Someone had gone through great effort to erase her identity, but they'd failed. That pendant had given her name back. When it was over, Hayes peeled off her gloves, her movements precise and slow. You said she went missing in 1996? Yeah, 29 years ago, Daniel replied. But the body looks like she died yesterday. Hayes turned toward him, her eyes unreadable. You're sure it's her? He hesitated. I'll wait for the DNA, but yeah, I'm sure. She nodded, but there was no satisfaction in it. Just thought, deep and dark. I want to see the site where you found her, she said. The drive back to the river was silent except for the crunch of tires on ice. The forest on either side of the road looked ancient. Black pines hunched under snow, branches heavy, shadows long. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were leaning closer, listening. When they arrived, the ice where the body had been was already starting to crust over again. A thin veil of frost erasing the wound. Hayes crouched down, studying the spot. The ice didn't break when you found her. No, Daniel said. She was sealed in, like the river swallowed her whole and froze her mid-breath. Hayes brushed the surface lightly, her fingers tracing the edge of the hole. Then someone put her here after she was already frozen. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You mean she was moved? Exactly. The preservation makes sense now. This isn't environmental freezing, it's controlled. Industrial, cryogenic maybe. She stood, her breath visible in the cold. This wasn't murder in the moment. This was storage. The word hit him like a punch. Storage. like someone had been keeping her waiting for the right time to unearth her again. But why now? Back at the station, Daniel spread the cold case photos across his desk. 4 women, 4 disappearances, and now 1 body. The others, where were they? He noticed something he'd missed before. Each of the missing women had been last seen near a river or lake. Claire Morton, Koyuk River; Jessica Laird, Eagle Lake; Beth Combs, Cedar Creek. The same pattern, water always nearby. He called Hayes into the office. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the map he'd pinned to the wall. "If you mark the locations of each disappearance, you get a line." He drew a red line connecting the points. It curved northeast toward the old mining district beyond Desolation Pass. "Right here, that's the center." Hayes studied the map, her eyes narrowing. "What's there now?" "Nothing," Daniel said. "Just abandoned tunnels, a few collapsed shafts. Used to be a gold mine before the war." "Then that's where we start." That night Daniel couldn't sleep. The storm had returned, the wind pressing against the station windows like something alive. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the only light coming from the desk lamp. The pendant lay beside him, gleaming faintly. He picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. On the back, so faint it was almost invisible, was an engraving, tiny letters that caught the light just right. SP. He frowned. He'd seen those initials somewhere before. He opened another file, the one for Jessica Laird. She'd worked as a research assistant for the St. Paul Institute of Biological Studies, an independent research facility shut down in 1997 after an ethics investigation. The spiral, the eye, the initials. He sat back, heart pounding. It wasn't random. It wasn't ritual. It was organized. A system, a method. Someone had been collecting these women, preserving them, marking them like property. At 2:14 a.m., his phone rang. He answered, expecting static again, but the line was clear this time. A woman's voice whispered softly, "You shouldn't have touched her." Then silence. Daniel froze, the receiver still pressed to his ear. The line went dead. He looked at the pendant again, now gleaming like a small, unblinking eye in the lamplight. And for the first time since he'd found the body, he felt something colder than the Alaskan night settle into his bones. Something he couldn't name, but it felt a lot like being watched. Days passed, and the small town of Greystone seemed to shrink around Daniel Cole. Every street felt quieter, every face more suspicious. Word of the frozen woman had spread faster than the wind itself, and the townsfolk, already used to strange stories, began whispering about the curse of the Koyuk River. Daniel had heard them in the diner that morning, their voices low and wary, speaking of omens, of old legends that warned against disturbing the dead beneath the ice. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in people, broken, cruel, unpredictable people. But something about this case was different. It wasn't just brutality. It was precision, purpose, and patience that stretched across decades. He spent every hour he could digging through the past. The pattern was clearer now. 4 missing women between 1994 and 1996, all last seen near water. All young, all with no family left behind to demand justice. It was as if someone had chosen them carefully, erased them completely, and hidden them where no one would ever look. Only Claire Morton had resurfaced, preserved like a message waiting to be read. Lorna Hayes had taken over one corner of the station, her files and samples spread across every surface. She worked with surgical calm, methodical, eyes sharp and distant. Daniel admired her focus, but couldn't help feeling uneasy around her. She had an intensity that felt old, like she'd been waiting for something too. Sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, she'd stare at the spiral photos longer than necessary, her fingers tracing the lines absent-mindedly as if they meant something to her. One evening, she looked up from her notes. "You said there was an old mining site near Desolation Pass?" "Yeah, Daniel said, glancing at the map. Closed in the 60s after a collapse. Locals say it's haunted. Not haunted, Hayes murmured. Hidden. She turned the map toward him, tapping a finger against the region near Lake Desolation. If this was about preservation, controlled freezing, deliberate storage, then you'd need infrastructure, power, cold. A place isolated enough that no one asks questions. Daniel leaned closer. You think someone was using the mines? I think whoever did this had access to them, she said. And I think they're still using them. The words lingered between them like frost. They left before dawn, the sky a dull bruise of gray over the mountains. The snowmobiles cut through the silence as they followed the old mining road north, the path narrowing into a corridor of black pines. The deeper they went, the less the forest felt like nature and more like something watching them back. Daniel kept one hand near his holster, though he wasn't sure what he expected to find. Hayes rode ahead, her braid whipping in the wind, her posture steady, fearless. When the mine finally came into view, Daniel slowed to a stop. The entrance yawned open like a wound carved into the rock, edges rimed with ice. A weathered sign leaned to one side, barely legible. Carter Mining Co. Restricted area. Snow had gathered thick at the threshold, undisturbed. No footprints. No sign of life. Hayes dismounted and approached first, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam into the dark. Smell that? She said quietly. Daniel caught it too. A faint metallic tang beneath the cold. Blood, rust, and something chemical. They stepped inside, their lights catching the frozen walls and the rusted remnants of machinery. The tunnels twisted deep into the earth, splitting in multiple directions. Old rail tracks still ran along the floor, half buried in ice. They moved carefully, following the faint hum of air flowing through the shaft. The deeper they went, the colder it grew until Daniel's breath came out in thick clouds. Then he noticed something odd. The walls weren't just ice, they were lined with frost that shimmered faintly under the light, like condensation on metal. The air felt mechanically chilled. Someone's been maintaining this place, Daniel muttered. Hayes didn't answer. She was staring at something ahead. He followed her gaze. At the end of the tunnel, faint light flickered behind a steel door. Modern, clean, completely out of place in a mine that had been abandoned for 60 years. They exchanged a look, both unspoken questions hanging in the air. Then Hayes stepped forward and tested the handle. It gave with a hiss of pressure. Inside, the air was colder still, the kind that bit into skin. The room beyond was small, square, and horrifying. The walls were covered in old newspaper clippings, photos, and police reports. Every missing woman from the files was there, pinned like exhibits. Dates, symbols, locations, each connected by red string to a large spiral drawn across the center of the wall in what looked like dried blood. In the middle of the room stood a crude altar built from stacked stones and bones, frozen solid. On top of it sat several glass jars filled with murky liquid. Inside them floated what looked like... Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Those are tongues. Hayes moved closer, too calm. He kept them as trophies, she said softly, almost reverently. Every one of them. He? Daniel asked. Hayes tilted her head, her eyes flicking to the spiral. Not he, she whispered. They. Daniel's stomach tightened. What do you mean they? Before she could answer, a sound echoed down the tunnel. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing like the heartbeat of the mine itself. Daniel's flashlight snapped toward the door. Who's there? He called out, his voice sharp, controlled. No answer. Just the steady rhythm of boots crunching through ice. He drew his weapon. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The light at the doorway shifted, and for a split second he saw a figure move past the frame. A shadow that was gone before his light could catch it. Hayes didn't flinch. She simply turned to him, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't have come here alone, she said quietly. Before Daniel could respond, pain exploded across the back of his skull. A sharp crack. Then darkness swallowed him whole. He didn't know how long he was out. Minutes, maybe hours. When he came to, his flashlight was gone, replaced by the soft, flickering glow of a lantern. His vision blurred, the edges of the world swimming. The air was thick with the stench of rot. He was lying on something cold and uneven. Bones, hundreds of them, layered beneath him like a bed of the dead. Easy. A voice murmured from the dark. Hayes. She was standing just beyond the lantern's light, her face half in shadow. You hit your head. Daniel tried to sit up, his pulse hammering, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish. He looked around. The altar, the clippings, the jars, they were all still there. But now he saw something he hadn't before. Symbols etched into the walls, carved deep into the stone, glowing faintly as if lit from within. The spiral pattern repeated over and over, forming a network that pulsed faintly in the dimness. What the hell is this, Hayes? He rasped. What are you doing? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lifted the lantern, revealing her wrist. The skin there was marked with the same spiral symbol carved into Claire Morton's ribs. Daniel froze. I told you, she said softly, her voice distant. It wasn't one man. It was an order. A preservation society, if you want to call it that. We study purity, the stillness of death untouched by decay. Her eyes gleamed in the flickering light. You woke it up when you found her. Daniel's hand crept toward his boot where his knife was sheathed. You're insane. Maybe, she said, stepping closer. But insanity keeps secrets better than reason. The sound of movement came again from deeper in the tunnels. Soft murmurs, multiple voices, low and rhythmic. The air trembled with them. Daniel's pulse spiked. There were others here, he didn't wait. In one motion, he lunged forward, slashing the knife from his boot. The blade caught the edge of the lantern, sending it crashing to the ground. Flame spilled across the floor, licking at the old paper and the frozen bones. Hayes shouted something, words in a language he didn't understand. Daniel staggered toward the tunnel, his vision spinning. Behind him, the room erupted in orange light, the spiral symbols glowing brighter as if feeding on the fire. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him. He stumbled through the dark, half-blind, the smell of smoke and thawing death filling the air. The tunnel twisted endlessly until finally a cold draft hit his face, an exit. He ran toward it, his breath tearing through his lungs, and burst out into the night. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, gentle and soft, erasing his tracks as soon as he made them. He turned back once, expecting to see the flames devouring the mine. But there was nothing. Just darkness. The forest was silent again. Too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't end, it just waits. When Daniel woke, the world was dim and still, the cold pressing against his skin like a second layer. His breath came out in shallow clouds and every muscle in his body screamed as he moved. The air smelled of decay and rust, sweet and nauseating. His fingers brushed against something rough and round beneath him, and when his eyes adjusted to the lantern's weak light, he realized what it was. Bones. Dozens of them piled high like refuse, ribs and skulls jutting from the frozen earth in grotesque shapes. He was lying in a pit made of the dead. Above him, the faint scrape of boots echoed against the cavern walls. He looked up, and there she was, Dr. Lorna Hayes, standing on the ledge with a lantern in her hand, her face ghostly pale in the flickering light. Her shadow stretched long behind her, bending and warping along the jagged walls. She looked down at him the way a scientist might study an animal in a cage. Detached. Calm. You shouldn't have come here, she said softly. Her voice wasn't angry, not even surprised. It was almost mournful. You woke the silence. Daniel pushed himself up, his hands slipping against the frozen ground. His gun was gone. His radio, even his flashlight. What the hell is this? He growled, his voice hoarse. Hayes stepped closer to the edge. The lantern's glow revealed streaks of dried blood on her coat. It's what you were looking for, she said. You just never understood what you were chasing. He forced himself to his feet, steadying his breath. The pit wasn't deep, 10 feet maybe, but the walls were slick and crumbling. Climbing out without tools would be nearly impossible. Still, he kept his eyes on her, searching for any sign of hesitation, any weakness. You killed those women, he said, each word deliberate. Claire Morton, Jessica Laird, Beth Combs. You froze them, carved them, buried them like specimens. Hayes tilted her head slightly, almost pitying. No, she said. We preserved them. The others let them rot. Let their stories dissolve into the snow. We made them eternal. Her eyes gleamed with something close to devotion. They were chosen for their purity. The world forgets goodness, Daniel. It corrupts it. We stopped time before it could touch them. Daniel clenched his fists, rage igniting in his chest. You're sick, he said. Hayes smiled faintly, almost sad. Sickness implies pain. What we did was mercy. She knelt at the edge, holding the lantern lower. You don't have to understand it. You just have to see it. The light spilled across the pit, revealing more than bones this time. There were faces. Frozen faces half buried in the ice, their eyes open, their expressions caught between peace and terror. Rows of them stretching into the shadows. Claire Morton was there, her red scarf still wrapped around her neck. The spiral mark was carved into her chest like a signature. Daniel's stomach twisted violently. He turned away, bile burning his throat. You call this mercy? He rasped. You butchered them. We released them, Hayes said softly. They're the quiet ones now. No more fear, no more noise. That's what he wanted. Daniel looked up sharply. He? Hayes hesitated. The flicker of her lantern caught the trembling of her jaw, the first crack in her composure. He was the first, she said. The one who found the ice, who understood it. We kept his work alive, even when the world forgot. Her voice softened, almost tender. He taught us that silence is a gift. Daniel's blood ran cold. The wind whistled faintly through the tunnels, a low, steady hum that sounded almost like breathing. He took a step closer to the wall, testing its texture. Ice had formed a thin sheen over the stone, slick but climbable. Slowly, silently, he began to move, inching upward while she spoke. Hayes didn't seem to notice. She was lost in her own confession. We were meant to protect his work. But then they started looking for us. Investigations, closures, arrests. The Institute fell, but the order remained. We went underground, deeper than they could reach. And now you've come to destroy what's left. Her voice hardened. You shouldn't have touched her. Daniel reached the halfway point before the ice cracked loudly under his boot. Hayes turned instantly, her eyes catching the light like an animal's. Don't, she said. He ignored her and pulled himself higher. She raised her free hand, and for the first time, Daniel saw what she held. A small revolver, its barrel aimed steadily at his chest. You'll ruin everything, she whispered. You don't understand what's been kept here. I understand enough, he said. You think you're saving them, but you're just feeding your own madness. Hayes's finger trembled on the trigger. He told us this would happen. That someone would come with noise in his heart. Daniel reached for his knife, the one still hidden in his boot, and in a single desperate motion, he yanked it free and hurled it toward the lantern. The blade struck true. Glass shattered. Oil spilled. Fire bloomed. Hayes screamed as the light flared upward, illuminating the entire cavern. For a heartbeat, Daniel saw everything. The pit of bodies, the spirals carved into the walls, the ancient machinery embedded in the stone, humming faintly like a heart still beating. The flames caught the frost, racing upward in crackling orange lines. Daniel lunged, hauling himself out of the pit as the fire spread. Hayes stumbled back, shielding her face, the revolver slipping from her grip. He tackled her to the ground. The gun skidded across the ice. She struggled, clawing at him with surprising strength, her breath ragged. You can't stop it, she hissed. You can't silence the silence. Daniel pinned her down, his knee pressing against her shoulder. "It ends here," he growled. Her eyes locked with his. For a moment he thought he saw fear there, but then her expression shifted. Calm, resigned, almost serene. "No," she whispered. "It begins." The ice beneath them cracked with a deafening roar. Heat surged through the cavern as the fire reached the machinery. There was a sound like metal tearing, and then the ground gave way. The world exploded in flame and freezing air as the mine collapsed. When Daniel woke again, everything was white. Snow fell gently across the mountainside. He was half buried in it, his clothes scorched, his body numb. The sky above was pale blue, impossibly calm, as if the earth hadn't just swallowed an entire secret. He pushed himself upright, coughing, his hands raw and shaking. The entrance to the mine was gone, buried beneath a fresh avalanche. There was no sign of haze, no fire, no light, just silence. Hours later, the rescue team found him wandering near the river. His lips blue, his eyes unfocused. They said he kept repeating the same words over and over, voice flat and distant. The river stopped singing. Weeks passed before the thaw began. When the snow finally melted, the river ran red with silt and something else. Fragments of bone surfaced along the banks. Pieces of glass. A torn scrap of a red scarf. Every piece of evidence pointed back to the mine, but when investigators dug for it, they found nothing. No tunnels, no structures, just solid rock as if the mountain had swallowed the past whole. The official report labeled the case an accident. Structural collapse. No criminal evidence recovered. But the locals knew better. They still talk about that spring, when the ice broke early and the valley filled with a sound that wasn't quite the wind. Whispers rising through the thaw, faint and melodic, like voices trying to remember how to speak. Some nights when the fog rolls down from the mountains and the moon sits low over the river, the fishermen swear they hear singing beneath the current. A woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, drifting from the place where the river stops. Daniel left Alaska after that, resigned, silent. He never gave another statement, never returned to the force. But those who saw him said his eyes had changed, that he looked as though he'd seen something the rest of them weren't meant to. He moved south, far from snow and shadow, yet the cold never left him. And every year on the anniversary of the collapse, he wakes in the middle of the night to the sound of dripping water. Sometimes he swears he can still hear her voice, Hayes's voice, whispering softly from the dark. You woke the silence. Then the room falls still again. And somewhere far to the north, beneath the eternal ice, the echoes of the dead stir once more. Because in Alaska, nothing truly freezes forever. The ice doesn't keep secrets, it only delays them. And when it finally breaks, the silence always returns to finish the story it began.